All right, all right. I was waiting for the guest of honor to show up. She's, of course, always creating relationships. So jumping from another important call. Tiffany, how are you?
Hello. I'm good.
That's
I'm good. How are you?
very good. It's so good to see you. Before we jump into it, I just want everyone to please turn their cameras on so that if we get a chance to talk face to face, we'll be able to see your faces. I want to give everyone a little bit of background onto what's happening right now. So this is obviously an office hours actually for the opening of the Fundraise with Confidence course. We'll have another office hours coming up on Monday, a couple of days before applications close. And it's on how to raise as an introvert. I'll be talking to another person that I've worked with in the past, founder named Andy Bach. If you are an introvert, if you're not an introvert, we're going to be talking about a lot of different things that are important to process around fundraising. And he went from, it's going to be a similar story, no prospects to a $1.2 million, $2 million seed round led by General Catalyst. So that's going to be exciting, but let's get into it. I think there are a lot of net new people here, people that I haven't seen before. So just want to give a quick introduction. It's really meant to give you guys context around the things that we'll talk about, the reasons that I have, the perspective that I have, or the frameworks that I've built. But it's also meant to draw a bit of a compare and contrast to what we'll hear from Tiffany about. I had a pretty deep background in tech, led a product team at MLB.com, was an investor at Greycroft, and actually had raised money in the past. But when I went out to raise money the second time around, I had all the network in the world, but I had to continue to work on my network. I had to continue getting connections. I had a lot of opportunities that I think Tiffany didn't have, and it was still difficult. So it's going to be very interesting to hear from Tiffany, who started from a very different point to actually get this done. And if you've seen any of my presentations, I always like giving this slide before we talk about anything, which is just to say that in this game of startups and especially fundraising, there will be many perspectives on how you get this done successfully. And my example of this is that there are two investors who I respect a lot, who I know both, Andrea Funston from Basecamp and Mark Suster from Upfront Ventures. They have essentially the exact opposite viewpoint on what you should do with data rooms. And look, they probably have similar first principles around this, but what you hear will be very different. And so I encourage everyone, whenever they hear blowhards like myself or anyone else putting out really interesting, tweetable content, to always try to ask additional questions and try to understand the first principles yourself so that you can be more creative as you're going through this really difficult process. In fact, what's more interesting is usually talking to people that have really just done it before, which is why I'm going to transition to talking to Tiffany. And I put up this great slide.
What a nice picture.
It is a really nice picture. I started seeing all the news reports come out about your fundraise, which you just announced $2 million from some really amazing investors. And I, on purpose, made this a little bit more of a stark contrast of the number of logos that are on your slide. As it's probably not 100% accurate, but Tiffany Kelly is the founder and CEO of Curastory, an amazing platform that's helped many creators, especially in the sports space, monetize what they do. And before that, as a young person, you had an initial job at ESPN, but not a lot else around that. Is that a fairly accurate?
Yeah.
Okay, so. And
that is fairly accurate. I'm super young.
Yeah. And I'll address a couple things, which I'm looking out in the audience. Good to see a diverse group of founders out there. Aside from not having my background of being in venture capital and big tech companies for numbers of years and the network that I had built over sort of 10 plus years, you come to the table as a Black woman with not huge networks. So a lot of the things that you see in the media that make it much more difficult to piece these things together. So I want to just bring you back into when you were like, have this great idea, know that I need to fundraise. If you could say a few words about how you would describe your tech network at the time, your tech and maybe like investing network at the time.
Oh man, zero. I didn't even know what a cap table was when I was like leaving ESPN. So I quit ESPN January 2019, moved to New York full time, and then kind of Curastory popped into my mind the summer of that year, but we didn't solidify on actually what it was until fall of that year. But like during those months, I just joined all these workshops, read so many books, and was just trying to figure out how do you actually do this thing and build. I learned so much information in a matter of 6 months, which is actually pretty crazy. But yeah, as far as network of people in tech, yeah, had zero. I think the only person that I knew was like Brian O'Kelly, who raised a ton of money for AppNexus. And so he was like the first person I was like, help, this is what I want to do. And then he just started connecting me to people. But yeah, I didn't really have anyone.
It was a tough starting point. Okay. So a couple of things that I think are really important for people to hear, which I credit you like so much. I'm so proud of you and so excited for what you've done. But everyone here listening, she started with an idea, and in a matter of 6 months, she did everything she could to learn about this industry and learn what the techniques are and learn what the strategies are. I think too many people, for a variety of reasons, just feel like they should just figure it out or go into it and like wing it and learn it. But you have to be a student of the game, especially if you're coming as an outsider, and understand all the things that go into actually getting a fundraise done, including this idea of, well, how do you fundraise without a great network? I think if you go online and you read stuff about fundraising, people will talk about finding warm introductions. I talk about it all the time. Warm introductions are some of the most important things you can get. But if I were to go to another slide here, maybe you'll remember some of these slides, Tiffany, but I share this with everyone, which is when I tell people you need to go find through your network how you get to investors, the answer will be, I don't know anyone. And Tiffany shared with us, she didn't really know anyone. She knew one person. I'll bounce back and forth between screen sharing and not, because I want to talk a little bit larger here. But Tiffany, like, what were the first things you thought you needed to do starting from zero network? And feel free to talk about the mistakes you made and the things that along the way. Like, how did you get to these incredible investors that you finally had invested?
Yeah. So I couldn't bootstrap because I didn't really have savings. Like, I left ESPN when I was like 24. Yeah. So I knew that we needed to raise in order to build Curastory once we settled on what it needed to be. Going out to a VC was actually extremely daunting. I was having like little conversations with people. I think probably the first couple of VCs that I talked to were like Human Ventures and like Primary, but didn't have a deck. Like, oh man, it's actually so bad thinking about this, like looking back. And Maisha Leek, who was like in charge of the studio at Human Ventures, she like sat me down. She's like, okay, I'm going to be the last VC that you talk to because you need to figure it out and you can't go to any other VC without a deck. So after that conversation with her, I was like, okay, cool. Like, not raising VC right now. And that was pre-seed, but I needed money to hire and build. I didn't pay myself for a really long time, but we just needed money to build the tech. So we actually did our pre-seed on WeFunder, which is crowdfunding. And like at that point, I was hearing so many schools of thought of VCs hating crowdfunding. I was like, at this point, I don't really care. Like, we just need capital. So did like 207 pre-seed crowdfunding, which is actually like pretty insane to say. We had 0 customers, 0 network, 0 anything. It was all just doing as much content marketing as I could to get people to invest on WeFunder. So that was like, yeah, that was pre-seed. And then we had money to actually do things and building the platform. It was barely anything, but it was enough to build kind of MVP and baseline for what we actually want to do and hire 1 or 2 people. And then Jason, like at the end of 2020, that's when we got synced up. And I was like, okay, we have good data points, traction. 200K, we turned it into 80K in gross revenue over a matter of 6 months or so.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, this is like more traction points than I feel like a lot of seed companies have. I feel like we can actually raise a seed now.
Yeah.
Well, which is when we talked and I took your class and then.
Yeah. And then we don't have to put as much credit as that, but I appreciate that. I want to pause you there and just reword some of the things that Tiffany said. I think it's what you said about crowdfunding is interesting. If you all have looked at crowdfunding in the past, there are perspectives on what crowdfunding means in terms of signaling. But at your earliest stages, this is what I tell people. You're trying to show how scrappy you are and how much you can get done with as little as you have. And so when people are telling you, for whatever reason, maybe you're not fundraising, you're not running the right process and things aren't going well, and you just need money to figure out what's next. If crowdfunding is an option and you can get that done, like Tiffany is a great proof point of, look, she just needed to start proving what she was capable of and being able to build product. The other thing that I think was great from the woman who paused you, which is like, essentially what I wanted to share with people is this idea of like, people rush into fundraising and they're like, yeah, let me just start talking to investors and maybe I'll be able to get a fundraise done. And I always show like this graph of effort of what it takes, what people actually try to do when they're fundraising, which is they're like, yeah, I guess I'm going to start fundraising. I think I'm going to fundraise at some point. And I think Tiffany at the beginning was like, oh, I need to go fundraise. So I'll just start talking to investors. And that's when all the effort kicks off. I'm talking to and I don't have a deck yet, but I'm pitching. And finally someone sat Tiffany down and was like, okay, look, if you want to do this, you're going to have to like get your story, which the deck is the manifestation of that. And you're going to have to start finding these introductions. Now, I want to quickly accelerate because I want to save 5 minutes of time for open question and answers. And this is supposed to be a very quick 30-minute hard-hitting conversation. But a lot of the work really is trying to figure out how you network from one small starting point, right? From maybe one connection that you had to then two connections that you had, and how this actually gets done. And I want to show you one of the questions that was submitted by somebody, I think that might be with us. And I saw this and smiled because I feel like without even checking with you, you're going to have really interesting answers here. Just read this on the screen and see if this like resonates with you at all, Tiffany, or anyone else. Sending intro asks into a black hole of nothingness from whence nothing returns. This is not a unique situation. And Tiffany, like having gone through some training, I feel like you're really good at answering this. So reactions there, let me hear what you have to say about that and maybe what kind of advice you would give to someone who would say that.
Wait, it's so funny because I'm trying to remember if I did intros for pre-seed, because it's funny because I wish I had an example of like me screwing up and then taking your class and then ta-da. But really, I pre-seed, I literally stopped fundraising and I just did crowdfunding. So I feel like I might have asked for intros from a couple people and then that's when my Yusha told me to stop. But then the next intros that I asked were with your skills, like from the class that we took. But yeah, I feel like those like intros that I did.
Yeah, describe what you do now. Describe what you do now because you're very good at it.
Oh yeah, I doc LinkedIn. You mean what I do now for a process, or
yeah, for a process?
You mean the process that I run now?
Yeah, because because this happens. You ask for intros and you don't get them, but you get them. Like you do get them. So talk a little bit about what that means.
Yeah. So created an investor spreadsheet. Like you have to know who you're going after. You have to have a blurb like ready to go. I think I like back channeled intros to one person from 3 or 4 different people. So I knew at least one probably was going to come. So sending blurb, getting the intro, having the first couple calls, that was all done as a process and not just like emailing, hey, like thinking of talking to this person, do you think this makes sense? Like actually had a full email, forwardable blurb, double opt-in. So it was just super seamless for the person that was actually like introing me as well.
Yeah. And
but if I wasn't doing that, I feel like if I wasn't doing that, definitely no one would have responded.
Well, I'll push you and ask you, because I've seen you do this with me. Let's say nothing comes back. Let's say you do ask for an intro from somebody and nothing comes back. What happens then? Just nothing?
I reach back out to you.
Exactly. Exactly.
Oh,
This is
I pester Jason.
And it's not just, and it wouldn't have been just me, it would have been everyone, right? Like, here's the fact of the matter that I think a lot of founders don't realize about this process. Everything from the asking of the intro to the like following up with the investor, it's all this really intense sales process that's like, you have to do a lot of research up front. You have to understand where the intros are coming from. And if it goes into a black hole, you need to dive into that black hole and go pull out that intro, because no one is coming to save you. I guess that's what it is. No one's coming to save you except for yourself. And you have to go after all these things, including the individual introductions, which is why so much work has to be done before you start the fundraising process. Okay. Let's go into some other questions, especially as it pertains to fundraising without a large network. But this one I thought was really interesting because I think I'm not sharing my screen. I think it's particularly hard because without a large network, there is so much more work to be done. So maybe with another couple minutes, can you talk about like the effort that went into networking in order to run this process, and then how you've thought about dealing with your time away from the startup?
Yeah, processes are like a big thing. So every single thing that we do in Curastory is there's a PRD for it, a process like requirements doc. Like we actually list out what needs to be done. That way, I'm not the only person doing everything. If you only have 1 or 2 or 3 people, we now have a team full time that's going to be like 8 people super soon. We have 6 full time at the moment, but I had processes in place just because I knew, I'm like, okay, like I legit can only do calls for investors. Don't talk to me. I'm going to be in back-to-back calls. Here are all the PRDs and documents for all the processes in the company that business could run just with them following those documents. But I would say if you're only 2 or 3 people, still just document what you're doing when you're not fundraising. That way you can still have those 2 or 3 people on your team like taking over if you're the CEO that's actually going out and raising money.
Yeah.
So yeah, I would just say like literally have a process to doing things. That way you can hand it off to 1 or 2 people that are helping you, the company, that way you can focus on actually like getting money and closing and talking to investors.
And how would you describe fundraising as a time commitment when you're doing it? Like, how much of your percentage of time spent is fundraising?
Oh my percentage? A lot. I don't know an actual percent, but
yeah,
I feel like to close a check, and just from like the beginning stages of actually talking to them, it takes, and this is like lead, right? I feel like it takes at least 2 to 3 weeks just to like talk to them. But yeah, so 30-minute calls, data room, getting on more calls, like answer questions, GP calls, like you're just always talking and on the phone.
Yeah.
And it takes a ton of time.
Yeah.
And I had to offboard a ton of stuff to the team as I was actually going through the seed. Plus we did Techstars too.
Yeah.
So just a lot of programming and calls.
I think so. I don't want to take up too much of Tiffany's time. She's literally in back-to-back calls and squeezed us in here. But the thing to underline here is she's dancing around this fact that fundraising, if you're going to do it well, is close to a full-time gig. And what I always tell people is, yeah, you could go 50-50, but all you're going to do is bleed out the pain. And so how do you deal with a time away from building the startup? Hopefully you have a co-founder that you can have an open conversation with and share. Like, a lot of times co-founders, especially technical co-founders, don't quite understand how difficult fundraising is and how much of a commitment it is. But hopefully you have a supportive co-founder team that you can talk to and say, look, I'm going to go get this done, and it's going to take real time. And you have to be willing and open to sharing the work with other people. And if you're a one-man show, one-woman show, anyone like that, you have to really understand that it's going to be 100% of fundraising and then finding an additional 20% to make sure the train stays on the tracks for the last, little bit of time. So I want to pause there and see with the remaining 5 minutes, if there are any open questions from the audience, either for Tiffany in particular or things about Fundraise with Confidence, which Tiffany was part of the first cohort, which we're really proud of having her. But otherwise, I hope this has been helpful. I think the thing about the reason I wanted to keep this at 30 minutes was that the main thing to talk about here is that people believe that they don't have a network and can't get it done. But networking is all about putting in effort and showing value to other people. And I think Tiffany has been really good at putting in the effort and having great conversations where people feel like they get value from her as well. And it's not going to be an overnight thing. Your thoughts around pre-seed investing before you understood what the game was like were late 2020, right? Something like that.
When I did our pre-seed?
Yeah.
Yeah, we closed it in August. We started like end of 2019. Yeah.
Right. And then her real raise in 2021 was really about preparation, networking, getting the right intros in so she could run the right process.
Any questions on, I'm curious if there's any questions on, I feel like someone just asked me about crowdfunding. Is there anyone curious about that? Totally feel free to talk.
Yeah. And if not if you guys are shy, we're going to post this and make sure people have opportunity to reach out. Tiffany is on Twitter too. It's at TiffMKell, right?
Yes.
We'll
Perfect.
TiffMKell, right?
Yep.
She's great at being accessible. And Tiffany, thanks so much for showing up. I think just having someone in the flesh talk about what it took to go from no network to $2 million of funding so that people know it can be done is really important and inspiring. So congratulations on everything. Thanks for being available. Everyone, you guys know how to contact me too. I thought people might have some questions about the fundraise, about Fundraise with Confidence, but if you do, please reach out. I'm at JYay on Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn. And I hope to see you guys in the next office hours, which will be on Monday. And we'll probably reserve more like 45 minutes for that conversation. Okay. Tiffany, thanks so much for your time. Have a great rest of your day. And congratulations again.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.